I wasn't supposed to apply. That's what the email from HR had said, gently worded. Of course, with all the corporate pleasantries they teach you in seminars. While we appreciate your continued interest, this opportunity is geared toward candidates with more current industry experience. Translation: You're too old, Diane. Sit down. Let the new blood take over. I stared at that line for a long time. More current industry experience. I had 32 years of experience. I had built departments from scratch, managed teams through 3 recessions, trained half the managers they still had, and yet somehow, all of that was less valuable than someone with a fresher LinkedIn profile. I didn't reply to that email. I didn't need to. I just closed my laptop, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat quietly at the kitchen table, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the silence. My hands curled around the mug, not for warmth, but for grounding. My late husband always said I thought better with something in my hands. It had been a year since the layoff. They called it a strategic restructuring. But for me, it was a door slammed shut, just a few months before retirement. No farewell party, no gold watch, just a cardboard box and an escort to the elevator. I had smiled then, dignified, gracious. I even hugged my boss, the same boss I had mentored when he was fresh out of grad school. It's okay, I had said. I'll be fine, but I wasn't. The first few months were a blur of daytime TV and half-hearted attempts at gardening. My daughter, Rachel, kept telling me to rest, to enjoy this new chapter, but what she didn't understand was that my identity had been etched into those office walls. I didn't know how to be Diane without deadlines and morning meetings. And now this rejection from a job I could do with my eyes closed. I stood up, rinsed my cup, and looked out the window. The neighbor's dog was barking at the mailman again. Across the street, a boy rode his bike in crooked circles. The world kept moving. I was the only thing that had stopped. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind kept replaying that email like a cruel lullaby. More current industry experience. What does that even mean? Did wisdom have an expiration date? The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my notebook, not the grocery list one, not the one for bills, but the leather-bound journal I'd used during my career to track ideas, meeting notes, even tiny doodles in the margins. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting each note remind me of who I'd been, who I still was. Then I turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote in bold letters, I still matter. And below that, a plan began to form. The plan wasn't grand. It wasn't cinematic. It started with a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Start small." So I did. I dusted off my old laptop, ran every update imaginable, and then logged into the freelance platform my niece had once mentioned over Thanksgiving. "Try it, Aunt Diane," she'd said between bites of cranberry stuffing. "You have so much knowledge. People pay for that." At the time, I'd smiled politely, thinking, freelance, that's for people who wear earbuds and drink oat milk. But now I was willing to try anything. I filled out a profile, kept it honest, crisp, no fluff. Corporate operations veteran with over 3 decades of experience in team building, restructuring, and crisis management. Detail-oriented, deadline-obsessed, still loves a good spreadsheet. I didn't expect anything. But the next morning, I had a message. Then, by the end of the week, I had landed my first project proofreading training manuals for a startup based out of Austin. The work was simple, but it felt like oxygen. I edited every paragraph like my life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. The client left a glowing review. 2 more jobs, followed one, helping a small company rework their onboarding process. Another coaching a young manager through his first round of employee evaluations. I wasn't doing it for the money, though it helped. I was doing it because, for the first time in months, someone was listening again. Someone saw value in my experience, not age. 3 weeks in, I got an email that stopped me cold. Subject: consulting request, urgent help needed. It was from a company I recognized. Callaway and Finch. The same company that had absorbed my old department during the restructuring. The same company that had decided my role was no longer aligned with future goals. Now they wanted help. I opened the email, heart thudding in my chest. It was from a junior director. Apparently, their operations team was struggling. High turnover, missed deadlines, poor morale. They were looking for a short-term consultant, someone with experience. I laughed. Not bitterly, not cruelly, just deeply. the kind of laugh that bubbles up when life folds in on itself in the most unexpected ways. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I made tea, sat in the quiet, let the possibilities bloom in my chest like warm light. Then I wrote back, "Dear Mr. Langston, I'd be happy to discuss how I can help. Please note, I now work independently. My rates and terms are attached. No apology, no explanation, just worth." He responded within the hour. The first meeting was via video call. I wore a navy blouse and a string of pearls, not for them, but for me. It felt like armor, familiar, steady. Langston was younger than I expected, maybe 35 tops, nervous eyes, overcompensating with jargon. He welcomed me with a tight smile and launched into a PowerPoint before I'd even sipped my coffee. Charts, projections, buzzwords. Finally, he paused. "So, as you can see, we're in a bit of a bottleneck." I nodded, polite. "What's your turnover rate?" 38% in the last 6 months. "And how many mid-level managers are under 30? He blinked. "Almost." That told me everything. They'd gutted the experienced ranks, filled the gaps with shiny resumes and optimism, and now didn't understand why projects were stalling. No institutional memory, no mentorship, no backbone. "I'll need access to your internal documentation," I said. "Org charts, workflow logs, and I want to speak with your frontline staff. Unfiltered." He hesitated. "We usually keep consultants at a higher level." I smiled. "Then, I'm not your consultant." A beat, then a nod. 2 days later, I walked into their office for the first time in nearly a year. It felt surreal, like stepping into a house I'd once lived in, only someone else had rearranged the furniture. My old cubicle was gone, replaced by standing desks and beanbag chairs, but the tension in the air, that was familiar, too familiar. I spent a week embedded in their workflow, listening more than talking, asking the questions no one else did. "What's the one thing that always breaks here? Who do you go to when your manager won't listen? What did this company used to do better?" The answers were always the same: no direction, no trust, no glue holding things together. They had severed the roots and were shocked the tree was dying. I compiled a report, 36 pages, meticulous, direct, unapologetic. I outlined the missing systems, the managerial inexperience, the lack of cross-functional communication. I gave them a recovery plan in phases. At the end of the presentation, Langston looked pale. "This is a lot. It's honest," I replied. One of the senior VPs, a woman named Carla, leaned forward. "You wrote this yourself." "I lived this," I said. "I just finally put it on paper." There was a silence, and then, for the first time in over a year, I heard it again. "Would you consider staying on longer?" I met her eyes. Grounded. "Depends," I said. "Will I have a seat at the table this time, or just a folding chair in the corner?" They offered me a 6-month contract the next morning. Not just as a consultant, but as interim director of operations, the same title I'd once held before being restructured into irrelevance. I didn't sign right away. Instead, I asked for 3 things. First, autonomy, no micromanaging, no filtering my recommendations through brand optics. Second, a mentorship budget. I wanted to bring in 3 experienced women I had worked with over the years, each of whom had also been quietly pushed out before their time. Third, no emails after 7 p.m. Langston choked on his coffee at that one. "I work until midnight some nights," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "And how's that going for you?" He didn't answer. They agreed to my terms. By the end of the week, I had a badge again, a desk, my name on the org chart. But something had shifted. I wasn't there to prove my worth. I was there to set the damn standard. I started small, one-on-one meetings with staff, not to correct them, but to hear them. I sat with the overworked team leads, the anxious coordinators, even the janitor who cleaned the conference rooms. "People think no one sees me," he said one evening, as I emptied my tea into the break room sink. "I do," I replied, "and I appreciate it." On Friday afternoons, I left handwritten notes on desks. Nothing cheesy, just, "Thanks for the way you handled that client," or, "I saw how you stepped up this week. Nicely done." It took 2 weeks before anyone said anything aloud. Then one morning, a junior staffer stopped me in the hallway. "You're different," she said, blinking behind her glasses. "You make it feel safer here." I smiled, not for ego, for truth. That's the job. It was week 4 when I ran into him, Mark Halpern, the man who'd signed my layoff papers. He walked into the Monday briefing 15 minutes late, still wearing that same smug half-smile he'd used when he told me my role was being sunsetted back then. I'd said nothing, just nodded, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out with my dignity zipped up beside my farewell mug and unused vacation form. Now he sat across from me, and I was leading the meeting. He didn't acknowledge me at first, just leaned back in his chair and pulled out his phone under the table like I wasn't worth his full attention. "Mark," I said calmly, not raising my voice, "we'll be reviewing the systems you've greenlit this quarter. I'd appreciate your full presence." His eyes flicked up, sharp. I held his gaze. He put the phone away. I walked him through my plan, a streamlined onboarding process, real-time feedback channels for employees, updated accountability structures that didn't rely on past emails. When I finished, the room was quiet. Carla, the VP, tapped her pen once against her notebook and said, "We've needed this for years." Mark finally spoke. "This all sounds ideal on paper. But we're a fast-paced company. We don't always have time for niceties." I smiled, the kind of smile that had weathered 30 years of boardroom bravado. "It's not about niceties, it's about retention, about trust. You're losing people not because they can't keep up but because they don't feel seen." He shrugged. "People leave, it's part of business." "No," I said quietly. "People leave when they realize staying is just slow self-erasure." That landed. Even Langston glanced my way, surprised by the weight of the words. After the meeting, as the others filed out, "Mark Lingard." He finally said, "You know, I always respected your work." "Funny," I said, gathering my notebook. "You had a strange way of showing it." He didn't argue, and for the first time, I didn't wait for him to. The turnaround didn't happen overnight, but it happened by the end of month 3. Deadlines were being met again. Employees' surveys previously dismal showed a 40% increase in satisfaction. People smiled in the hallways. Some even laughed out, and every Friday, a few more chairs filled in the break room. They called it tea time with Diane. At first, it was just a joke. I brought in a box of chamomile once when I had a sore throat, and someone asked to share. Now, every week at 3 p.m., a kettle whistled and cookies appeared on a chipped ceramic plate I kept at my desk. We'd talk, not about projects, about lives, dogs, deadlines, daydreams, the human things that, more than any metric, was the real proof. People had returned to themselves. So when Carla asked to meet privately one Thursday morning, I already sensed what was coming. "We'd like to extend your contract," she said, folding her hands, "permanently. As full-time director of operations, you've rebuilt more than just systems here. You've rebuilt people." I paused. Not out of surprise, but out of clarity. I had already been thinking about what came next. I loved the work. I loved the people. But something inside me had shifted, subtly, quietly. I no longer needed the title. I no longer needed the office to feel worthy. I had proven what I came to prove, not to them, but to myself. "I'm honored," I said gently, "but I won't be staying." She blinked. "You're turning it down." "I am, but I have a recommendation for your next director. Her name's Alicia Patel. She's been underused in the project team for far too long. Smart, steady, sharp instincts." Carla leaned back, processing. "Why not stay and lead her?" I smiled. "Because sometimes leadership is stepping back and making space. I came to fix what was broken. And now, it's time I build something that's mine." I gave them a month's notice, not because they asked for it, but because I believed in leaving things whole, not scattered. During that time, I trained Alicia, sat beside her, not above her, let her make decisions, let her make mistakes, quietly, patiently, the way someone once did for me when I was 30 and green and terrified of messing up a fax order. On my last Friday, they threw a goodbye party. Nothing lavish, just bagels, flowers from the team, a little card signed in blue and black ink, some messy E's, some looping. What surprised me wasn't the gesture, it was how many people stayed afterward. One by one, they came up to me, some with shaky hands, some with practiced smiles. "You reminded me I mattered. You made this place feel human again. You were the only person who ever asked me how I really was." And waited for the answer. It wasn't applause. It wasn't a trophy. It was better. It was legacy. That night, I walked out of the building and didn't look back. Not in bitterness, not in relief, but in peace, because I knew who I was again, and it had never been tied to a badge or an org chart or a company's approval. I went home, made tea, opened my notebook, and started something new. A website. Nothing flashy, just my name, a photo of me smiling, and one sentence across the top: "You're not too old. They're just too blind." I didn't expect much, but within a week, the emails started, from women, from men, from people who had been laid off, overlooked, told they were too much or not current enough. People who were tired of being quietly erased. They didn't want revenge, they wanted renewal, and I knew how to help them find it, so I did. The first workshop I hosted was in my living room: 6 folding chairs, a whiteboard propped against the fireplace, 3 women from my old bridge group, 1 former HR director, a man in his 60s who'd been in logistics his entire life, and a young mother who whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." I smiled. "You will." We called it Reframe. Not a company, not a charity, a gathering space for those the world had tried to shelve. Every Tuesday we met. We rewrote resumes, we practiced interviews that didn't involve pretending to be younger than we were. We reminded each other that experience is not dust, it's depth. Soon, we outgrew my living room. A local library offered their basement. A community college asked me to speak. Then came podcasts, interviews, emails from people across the country. That the ripple had begun, and yet, I kept things small on purpose, personal. I still baked cookies for our sessions, still sent handwritten thank you cards when someone landed a new job or started a business, or simply stood up to say, "I'm still here." One rainy afternoon, as I closed up after a session, I noticed a note tucked into the back of a folding chair. It was written on the edge of a flyer we'd used to advertise a recent workshop. The handwriting was careful, faint. I didn't know I could still start again, but you made me believe I could. I folded the paper slowly, slipped it into my notebook, and sat for a long time, listening to the rain tap against the window. I wasn't famous, I wasn't rich, but I was relevant, and more than that, I was useful to myself, to others, to the truth I had carried all along. You are never too old to begin again. The world may try to bench you, to mute you, to file you under used to be, but your voice, your wisdom, your seat at the table, still yours. All you have to do is take it back.